In this video, we are going to talk about the 4 levers you can pull to grow any business. And we're going to do this with the CEO of Ask My Board, Pete Martin, who helped multiple companies double their revenue and their valuation in just 12 months.
Brilliant.
Let's talk about what is it that you teach.
Our method is called the Catapult Method, right? Which is, if you think about a catapult as a device, it's all about leverage, right? And you put the rocks in the paddle and you kind of crank the thing down and you get incredible leverage. And it was really the weapon of choice for hundreds of years, right? So we kind of borrowed that concept and it's all about leverage. And so the thing that we leverage is these things called these 4 pillars. We call them 4 pillars of power. It sounds a little bit like Rockefeller habits in terms of the 4 categories, but it applies to every business. The 4 pillars are team, customers, capital, and strategic execution. And I think what makes us different in terms of those 4 categories versus other methodologies is there is what we call these maturity cycles in each one of those 4 pillars. And each one of them provides a lever point for the other lever point, and each one of them provides levers for each other. The output and the outcome of those 4 pillars in a very strategic fashion, in a very methodical fashion, which is the methodology of the Catapult Method, it drives up the 8 drivers of value.
What are the steps in each one that I need to kind of look for, and what in each one of them helps me leverage the other ones?
Yep. So let's start with team. To us, the most important. And if you read Good to Great or any of Jim Collins' books, right, he focuses a lot on this too. And his key message is, which we believe is, you can have a great team and a bad strategy and you can figure it out, right? You can't take a good strategy with a bad team and execute and get it right. That's where companies just fail all the time.
Yeah.
So to us, it is all about the team. For the hundreds of business owners that I've talked to and CEOs, most business owners, if they're honest, it's almost always a team issue. It's a people issue, right? Almost every time. So that's kind of why we start with team. And one of the things, just one of the kind of first lessons that we talk about, and it's a pretty important theme right now because lots of companies are having problems hiring people, right? The war for talent has probably never been tougher than it is right now. So I'll give you a couple kind of tips that we would go through in the methodology. The first is, a lot of advisors will talk about creating these avatars for your ideal customer, right? Who is your dream customer? And really describe them and the psychographics and the demographics and the SIC code and right, all this kind of stuff. Nobody does this for employees. So this is one of the things we talk about in this maturity cycle, right? Spend some time thinking about what an ideal employee is like. What are those core competencies that apply across all roles? And we focus on 7 very specific core competencies that Google and all of the best, highest performing organizations have found that if you measure for these 7 competencies across whatever role it is, that serves as the foundation for A, cultural fit, and B, these are just the fundamentals you have to have. Grit being one of them, for instance, this resilience and grit. And as a smaller company trying to grow, you need folks who are okay with ambiguity and just figuring it out. And so there's these 7 traits that we tell every one of our clients to look for through every person, regardless of the role. And then you kind of add on the competencies you need for a specific role. So that's one example. And then once you get the team right, that team, depending on where you are in the maturity of the company, it sets the culture. So either you need to figure out what is your culture, right? What are truly the values that are important to you as a business owner and as a company, and make sure you hire people for that cultural fit. Or if you're an established company or you're starting out, then those first 10 people, 6 people in the company, they create the culture, and you're not going to get the chance to do it again unless you fire everybody. And so there's this big lever point between, the team you hire and the culture that you create. They provide then leverage for how you treat customers, right? And so all of these things kind of lever each other.
You started going from there to customers.
Yep.
What are the key things on the customer aspect of the Catapult method?
Yeah. So and again, there's a lot of depth behind all this. So we'll just talk about a couple of the items. So, we talk about the idea of a dream customer and, who is your ideal customer, right? And I think directly related to that is a lot of business owners, particularly if they're struggling, they see all kinds of opportunities that they want to chase, right? Revenue
Sure.
opportunities. And particularly, if you're much earlier in your maturity of your business, then you just got to get revenue in, right? And what we found over time, and my personal experience is, you end up chasing stuff that is not core to the business, either core to your culture, it's not profitable or whatever. And so getting very specific about what kind of business do you want to pursue. And even in the B2C space, right? It could be you've got this great coffee shop or whatever, some service in a particular geography, and you want to expand into the next geography. Really, thinking about, are the demographics and the psychographics the same for this next geography you want to go to, right? Because it changes your business potentially. And being very clear about that. And I'll, give you a very kind of personal example. So I sold one of my consulting businesses to KPMG. And early on in the business, we were about 2 years old and had about a dozen people or so. And we had a prospect basically reach out and say, you guys are the best at doing this one particular thing that we were doing. We would like to do business with you, and we'd like you to bid on this contract that is worth about $3 to $5 million a year, right? So as an early young business, we're like, pretty damn good deal, right? And it would have been 3-4 year contract. And prior to that, my co-founder and I had written this manifesto that we said, this is what the company stands for, right? And these are the kind of employees we want to hire. And this is the kind of client we want to have. And it didn't fit kind of with that culture, but it's this huge revenue opportunity, right? So we thought long and hard about it. And to make a long story short, we ended up declining doing business with this company. And the reason we did is they had kind of an industry reputation of basically treating suppliers like crap. And, we had a dozen people that we really cared deeply about. And we knew if we kind of put them on this project and this account, or even hiring other people, they were going to be treated like crap. So it was a very difficult, very, very difficult thing to turn that down. And I spent lots of sleepless nights just saying, man, this is kind of crazy. This is stupid. Should we do this? But it sent a very loud message to the employees that we were going to stick to our word.
Let's talk about, either strategic execution or capital. Which one comes first in your order?
Capital comes first. So in terms of, I've talked about these maturity cycles. So within the concept of capital, the maturity cycle is, first of all, get your arms around your cash flow, right? Number one, it's critical. It's kind of a common sense thing, but we have a very specific methodology to help businesses go through how they manage their cash flow to free up enough to invest in growth. That's kind of step number one. And so once we get that resolved and companies are maximizing and optimizing the cash flow that's coming from the business, and there's all kinds of things in there. We talk about pricing, right? Most companies underprice their services and product offerings. So we've got modules to talk about this concept of value-based pricing and how you differentiate the business. And when we talk about the customer segment and customer acquisition, we spend a lot of time about what we call lighthouse positioning, which is how do you really differentiate the business in the minds of customers, right? And do that in a way from a marketing perspective, then creating a set of buying criteria where you essentially are the only choice, right? And then that leads into, again, higher profits, right? More cash flow and this kind of stuff. So the part of the maturity cycle on the capital piece is getting cash flow to where you can afford the growth. Then you're in a position to then go get external financing if you want to use that to grow. And there's more ways to raise capital now than there ever has been in the last 20 years. And then getting to the point where you essentially can treat the business almost as a financial asset, right? And so if you want to kind of move to this, I don't want an exit, but I want to be the chairman, right? And I want to hire a full-time CEO. You treat this as a financial asset and you can go acquire other companies, you can go invest in other things, right? You've got lots and lots of options. So that's part of this maturity cycle is manage your cash properly, optimize it, get more cash flow to grow, get external financing if you need it, and then get to the point where then you can either reinvest the profits or you harvest some of the profits and then you go do some other things. right? So that's all part of the capital cycle.
How do you manage the money that you get, right? So it's a big part of what you're talking about is how to view the business as an asset versus how to view the business as a workplace.
That's right.
So when you start a business, and again, I said that people who've been listening to me for a while heard this several times. I don't care if your business is mowing lawn, right? You go from house to house with a lawnmower and you kind of mow the lawn. If you think yourself as like, okay, that's what I do, I cut grass, you will always cut grass. If you think of yourself, I'm the CEO of the Florida grass cutting company, I will start to put in place systems, processes, mindsets, capitals that will over time allow me to hire people to cut grass, to manage the cash flow, to do the marketing. And in the end of it, two things happen. A, I can choose to cut grass if I want to, but I don't have to do that. And
Yep.
B, I can actually exit the business because otherwise you are the business. There is nothing to sell.
That's
Because
right.
if you're involved in so many things in the business, nobody will buy the business because they're buying you and you don't want to be in the business anymore.
Yep.
So it does two things, right? It creates that financial freedom, but it also creates the ability to leave whenever you want to leave, which otherwise just doesn't exist. Strategic execution. So
Yep.
how does that combine into everything?
So this is a really interesting one. And so, if people study Rockefeller habits, he talks about execution. And we very specifically say strategic execution because what you work on matters and what you don't work on matters, right? And we all have 24 hours in a day. And from what the individual business owner works on to what the business works on and focuses on, either accelerates growth or takes away from it, right? And we have lots of insights about, what are you really great at, right? And those are the things that you double down on and you work on. And if you're not great at it, you outsource it, right? And going through that and putting the controls in place and the process in place. So that's all kind of a part of it. That's definitely my background for 25 years is business processes with SAP and this kind of stuff. But not all things are equal in importance, right? And from a process perspective. And so do you want to be great at customer acquisition and marketing? Do you want to be great at, serving customers and onboarding and customer loyalty? Do you want to be great at hiring people? Like you come up with a couple of things that you really want to be great at and you double down on those things. And then you figure out a way to either, do you just need to be average and just kind of get it done? Or do you just completely outsource that function, right? And so we very specifically call it strategic execution because we go through this process of, all right, let's get a handle on what you're doing as a business. What should you automate? What should you outsource? What can you then potentially make a service offering? And so if you kind of think in terms of that mindset and think about all the stuff that's kind of going on, right? Should you hire a full-time controller or should you just outsource it to, an accounting firm? Should you, and then putting the controls in place and having this. And so when it goes back to then team, right? Team to us is not just individual employees. It's your network of providers and partners, right? And so the strategic execution kind of ties back to team. It ties back to, the people thing, the cost, the cash flow, all this stuff again kind of fits together really nicely.
I want to ask you kind of like a follow-up question because when we spoke in our initial conversation, you said something about you were able to help multiple companies double their valuation in 12 months.
Yep.
Which is mind-blowing to me. What are the biggest levers that a business can pull in order to increase valuation specifically?
Yeah, if you look at the 8 core drivers of value, we won't go through all 8 of them, but there's a couple of them that are probably most important to a buyer, okay? Number one is growth. What is your growth rate, right? And a very common theme that it's hard for a business owner to kind of get in their head that's really important is an acquirer is paying for your future, not your past, right? They only care about your history as a company insofar as it's going to help them grow and get a return on their investment. So from that perspective, if you've got this trajectory, this growth trajectory, and they see this consistent growth in revenue and profits, you're in a great position then to ask for the maximum valuation for your business. A second thing, and this is a very personal thing from the owner's perspective, and it's not the most important valuation metric, but it's really important when it comes to deal terms. And that is, how much of the business are you the business, right? Are you the architect where you've put in all the sales processes and the lead engines and all this kind of stuff? Or are you out being the rainmaker, right? And so we talk about this thing called the owner's trap. And if you are generating all the business, you may be able to sell the business for a good multiple, but guess what? You're going to have a multi-year earnout, right? And that's very standard because, again, the buyer is buying the future. And if you're the one generating all the sales, right, they're going to want to make sure that's going to be in place.